Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining the second IIP strategic debate of this year. While everyone is still connecting, we'll just go through some light housekeeping. So first of all, for interpretation, this event is available in English, French, and Spanish. We invite you to pick your language channel from the start of the debate, as the language may change throughout the session. You can choose your language by clicking on the globe at the bottom of your screen, and you can also activate closed captions by clicking on the CC. The presentations for this debate will be available in the three languages of the sessions, and you can download the slides in your language by clicking on the link that my colleagues will post in the chat. This chat will be our main form of communication. Please don't hesitate to introduce yourselves and tell us where you are connecting from. If you have any technical questions, you can also ask them here. My colleagues will be posting messages throughout the debate and links for you, so please keep an eye out in the chat. We will also have a Q&A session towards the end of the event. My colleagues will be collecting your questions throughout the different presentations, so please don't hesitate to add your questions in the chat in English, French, or Spanish. And also, please note that this session is being recorded and we will share it in the coming days so you can rewatch and share. And now I'm pleased to hand over to IIP's director, Martín Benavides, who will introduce today's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. And well, thank you for joining us for this second IIP strategic debate for 2025. We are very happy to see that there are different colleagues from different parts of the world already connecting to this strategic seminar. This debate is part of a series for 2025, where we take a closer look at how educational planner can promote learning equity. This year, we are partnering once again with the UNESCO SDG 4 Global Cooperation Mechanism, as well as with the Learning Equity Initiative and ADEA. Today's session will focus on strategies to improve learning equity and prevent school dropouts. As we know, marginalized learning face numerous challenges that make it difficult to pursue their learning journey. These challenges may be related to gender, ethnicity, language, or other social barriers, while climate change further exacerbates existing inequalities. Helping marginalized learning to succeed in the educational system requires customized solutions, and that's the purpose of this strategic seminar. This debate then will spotlight innovative measures for improving learning equity and preventing school dropouts currently in use in Latin America, Europe, and Africa. It will pay particular attention to early detection and preventive actions to reduce dropouts. More specifically, today's session will look at three different points. First, the key drivers and approaches behind the formulation of strategies to detect at-risk students and prevent school dropouts. Second, some of the main challenges faced by education authorities in implementing such systems, including challenges to data collection, working across different levels of the system, across sectoral collaboration, but also we will look at innovative approaches to improve learning equity, including those piloted with the support of civil society, representing the voices of marginalized learning and pushing for policy changes. As always, our lineup of speakers include national and international education experts, practitioners, academics, and also IIP staff members, with an aim to compare and discuss different perspectives and to learn from each other's experiences. I'm pleased to introduce our very strong lineup of speakers for today. First, our colleague and friend, Silvia Schmelkes, currently an honorary researcher at the Ibero-American University of Mexico. She founded and was general coordinator for intercultural and bilingual education in the Education Ministry in Mexico. We also will have Philippe Le Breton, who is head of the Guidance and School Dropout Prevention Office at the Ministry of National Education in France. Under this position, he designed, managed, and evaluated the implementation of the French national programs promoting dropout prevention and the return to education of young people who have less educational system. We also will have our colleague Fernanda Luna, who is an IIP colleague from our Office for Latin America and the Caribbean. Her responsibilities there include supporting, coordinating, and supervising the information system on educational trends in Latin America called the CTL. We also will have Irving Fernandez Rojas, who is the coordinator of the Unit for Retention, Reintegration, and Education Success at the Ministry of Public Education from Costa Rica. Irving has also served before in various institutions, including the Joint Social Welfare Institute, Instituto Mixto de Ayuda Social, where he led the socio-educational development area. And finally, I'm also very pleased to welcome Watsanayi Chitiga, who is acting program manager at the Education Coalition of Zimbabwe, where she oversees project tackling issues of quality, gender sensitive, and inclusive education delivery in disadvantaged communities. She also leads advocacy efforts engaging key policy players such as parliamentarians, directors from within the ministries, and school development committees. So we have a very interesting and prestigious group of speakers today. And now I will give the floor to my colleague Muriel Poisson, who will moderate the session. Muriel.
Thank you, Martin. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. So to organize our sessions today, we are going to do as we did last time as this series of strategic debates. So we are going to give 7 minutes to each of our speakers to present their point to you. And this will be followed by a short round table. And then I will give you the floor, our online participants. So please, as you hear the presentations from the colleagues, include your comments and questions in the chat during those presentations. And so we will try to keep about 25 minutes at the end of these sessions for a Q&A session. And so without further ado, I'm going now to hand it over to our first speaker, Sylvia, who is going to kick us off, providing a number of definitions, concepts, and providing the overview for Latin America to help us set up the scene for today. So over to you, Sylvia. And Sylvia will be speaking in Spanish. So please, colleagues, go to the interpretation at the bottom bar of your screen.
Bueno, ¿qué tal? Muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes a todas y todos los que me escuchan. Agradezco mucho.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I would like to start by thank the IIEP for inviting me. A lot is being said about the lack of equity in learning. Well, I would like to talk to you about the results, the outcomes of a study that we carried out with the help of IIEP in Latin America. I would like to talk to you about lack of equity in learning, but also about statistics and policies that were implemented in order to fight inequality and inequity. First, I would like to tell you why we need to talk about lack of equity.
Next one, Feng Shui.
Next, please.
Primero, porque lograr aprendizajes es el propósito último de la educación.
Why is it important? Well, because learning is the ultimate purpose of education. Education is a basic human right, and this is the reason why we need to understand the right to learn as a human right. It's also the substance of SDG 4. This is the ultimate goal of social justice. Unfortunately, learning is not equal. Next slide, please. What do we mean by equity in learning? Well, In the previous strategic debate, we already defined equitable learning. Learning equity means the ability to benefit from learning regardless of what your conditions are and regardless of what your background is. What is important is to keep in mind and to recognize that there are structural reasons that translate into barriers to achieve learning equity. In other words, in order to achieve learning equity, we have to have a fair distribution of resources and meaningful participation of all groups in the learning process. Next slide, please. So, how is learning dispensed is in one of the least equitable regions in the world. Well, here you can see the SEL quintiles look like. What are the outcomes in mathematics teaching on the third grade based on the ERC test? The blue is the poorest quintile and yellow is the richest quintile. And you can see that there's a huge difference between all of those populations. Every single such spread based on either income or ethnic backgrounds will be similar, as evidenced by PISA. You can see that poor people and rich people do not benefit from equitable learning outcomes. There are 4 levels of schooling that are very clearly defined. The difference between countries, but also within countries, are very stark. Next slide, please. So, who are we talking about exactly? So the groups which benefit the least of educational systems are clearly identified, and they have been targeted by a number of priorities in this conclusion that we reached. So number 1, socioeconomic disadvantage, ethnic and cultural groups, Afro-descendant communities, migrant children, indigenous peoples. And on the other hand, you also have a number of other categories such as girls, LGBTQ plus youth, as well as people living with disabilities, especially children with disabilities. And there's also intersectionality. In other words, people who bring all those together. Next slide, please. Right now, I would like to get back to what this poll this investigation on inequity tells us. They are structural conditions which have nothing to do with the educational system itself, but which is not exactly recognized and overcome by learning systems. These structural conditions range from socioeconomic to cultural diversity. This is particularly true in a region such as ours, and this is something that is not well recognized. Next slide, please. This is something that is not well understood and well tackled in our region. Now, what kind of internal conditions are we facing here? This is where we have some room for maneuver. This is where policies and teachers can act. Number 1, policy, design and management, distribution of resources, which is not equitable, as well as the emphasis on access to a learning system, as opposed to pedagogy. This is how children learn. Number 2, there's also a large part that has to do with teacher policies, training teachers, supporting teachers, as well as supporting their careers. And finally, there's the curriculum and pedagogical practices, which are starkly unadapted to the needs of the population. Next slide, please. So we have to bear in mind that external and internal conditions are very much part and parcel of the same problem. The most marginalized receive less resources, they receive poorer attention, they do not benefit from adapted content and bespoke language and methods, which means that as a consequence, education replicates social inequalities and gaps are not tackled. Next slide. So what do we need to change? What do we need to do? Well, there has been a number of recommendations that stem from a widespread consensus. Number one, every reform needs to be carried out at a system level. We need to promote synergies. We need to make sure that we understand, we grasp the complexity of the issue. Number two, we need to be aware of diversity and take this into account. One size fits all solutions will not work. Therefore, we need to provide better and more resources to those who needed them. We also need to be aware that teachers are the main players of transformation. In other words, we need to work hand in hand with teachers and support them. We also need to provide more support to pedagogical transformation to make sure that this can translate in practice into changes. Because of structural reasons, educational systems can't act on their own. We need to promote intersectoral policies that will have an impact and that will tackle both external and internal problems. And this is the reason why we believe that IIPE can be a key stakeholders. Thank you so much for your attention and thank you for everything.
To take into account when talking about learning equity and also sharing this list of different policies to address learning equity. And so this is a smooth transition with our next presentation that will be made by Philippe Le Breton from the French Ministry of Education, as Philippe is going to share with us in details, well, the type of policies that is currently put in place by the French ministry to prevent, to intervene, and also to remedy school dropout in the French context. So over to you, Philippe, and Philippe will be talking in French, so keep your interpretation.
Merci beaucoup Muriel. Bonjour à
Thank
toutes
you
et à
so
tous.
much, Muriel. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for
participer à ce
inviting me to
débat
say a few
au
words
cœur
and to
des politiques
attend this
que
debate,
nous
which is
menons
very much
en
part and
France.
parcel of what we do here in France.
Présenter la politique de lutte contre le décrochage scolaire que nous
Thank you for
déployons
giving me
en
an
France en 7
opportunity to
minutes.
tell
C'est un
you
défi,
about
mais je vais essayer de
the way we
relever
try and
aussi
fight the
efficacement
school
que
dropout. Now,
possible.
I only have 7
Merci
minutes,
de
and this is
passer
quite a
la slide
challenge, but I will
suivante.
try to do it nicely. Next slide, please.
Diapositive suivante, s'il vous plaît. Voilà, je voudrais commencer par
So I would like
m'appuyer
to
sur
start
deux
by
indicateurs qui
saying
permettent de mesurer
two
le
things and
décrochage.
looking
Un
at
premier en
two
flux et un
indicators
second en
as a
stock.
measure of
En
dropout. One has
France,
to do
chaque
with
année,
flows and the other one has to do with
76 000
stock.
jeunes quittent
Every
le
year,
système scolaire sans
76,000
diplôme ni
youth
qualification,
leave the school
ce qui est
system
assez
without any
considérable.
diploma and
Et
any
donc, c'est ce premier
qualification. It's
indicateur
a
du
lot.
flux que je souhaitais vous
And this is
présenter
the
au
first
départ.
thing that I
En
wanted
stock,
to
cette
talk
fois,
to you about.
si l'on
Now,
regarde
looking
parmi la
at
population des
numbers, if
jeunes
you look
âgés de
at
18 à 24 ans
18 to
qui ont
24
quitté le système
olds
scolaire
who
précocement,
left
c'est-à-dire qui sont
the
sans
school
diplôme,
at
sans
an early
qualification
age,
et hors système de
aka people
formation,
who have
eh
no
bien,
training,
on
no
observe que
diploma, no
la part de
degree,
ces jeunes s'élève à 7,6%. Et
7.6%
ces indicateurs, eh
of
bien, évidemment,
youth
ils
are in such a
nous
situation.
obligent à agir car cela représente
In other words, we
un
don't have a
coût
choice.
individuel,
This
bien entendu, pour
is
chaque classe
something that
concernée
costs a
et
lot,
à
both
l'échelle
at
de
a
la nation, un coût social
individual level, but also at a
global sur
societal
l'emploi
level in
précaire, de
terms of
pauvreté,
unemployment,
d'isolement, de délinquance et un coût
of
économique
youth
aussi,
crime.
selon
But
une
it
étude
also
récente qui a
costs
été menée
money,
en
according
France
to
par
a
un cabinet
recent poll
très
that was
sérieux. Eh
carried
bien,
out by a very
chaque jeune
well-respected
décrocheur
firm.
coûte
Each young
340 000
dropout
euros toute sa vie.
cost
C'est un coût qui prend en
340,000
compte à la
euros
fois le
over their
manque à gagner
lifetime.
pour le pays,
This took into
c'est-à-dire
account both
des
the
revenus moins importants qui sont
lack of revenue for
ceux
the
des jeunes
country as a
décrocheurs tout au
whole,
long de la vie et donc moins de rentrées d'impôts, et le surcoût
for
que
example, in
engendrent
terms of
eh
missing
bien, les aides
taxes, but it
sociales,
also takes into
les
account
dépenses de
the
santé. Les
amount
jeunes décrocheurs
of
sont plus exposés
benefits,
problèmes de
social
santé, de
benefits
justice
of
aussi. Il y a plus de
the social
délinquance parmi
justice. There's
décrocheurs.
a higher
Et donc,
level of
un coût
crime
très élevé
among young
par
dropouts, as well
décrocheur
as a
tout au long
higher
de
level
leur vie
of
pour la
health
société.
issues that have to be
Et
taken into
si vous
account.
multipliez ces
If you
340
take
000 euros par le
this amount,
nombre de jeunes qui sortent du
340,000
système
euros
éducatif
every
chaque année,
year, by the
76
number of
000,
people
eh bien, on
who
obtient un
leave,
coût
who are early
économique
dropouts,
considérable qui s'élève
you
à 26
realize
milliards
that
au total, donc
the
pour une génération
school
de
dropout
décrocheurs. Nous
phenomenon
donnons
costs
ainsi à chaque
26
fois
billion
26
euros
milliards
for every generation of
d'euros
early
que coûte
dropouts.
une génération de
This is what
décrocheurs.
one
Et donc cela
generation of
oblige
young early
à
dropouts costs
agir.
to society. In other
Et
words, we don't
merci,
have a
passer la slide
choice but do
suivante.
something about it. Next slide, please.
Merci. À agir en France, mais au-delà,
This
puisque
is something
la
that
lutte contre
needs
le décrochage
to
scolaire est
be
vraiment
tackled
une
both in
politique
France but
menée en
also
Europe depuis
in
de
Europe,
nombreuses
since it
années,
has been
depuis l'année 2000 précisément,
a
avec une stratégie
policy
qui a été
since
définie
2000.
à Lisbonne, qui visait à
In
faire
Lisbon, a new
de l'Union
policy
européenne une économie de
was
la
agreed
connaissance
upon to
et
turn
de
a European
la
economy into
compétitivité.
a knowledge-based
Une
economy and to
stratégie
increase
qui a clairement
competitivity.
identifié l'éducation et la
The
formation comme des
strategy had
leviers
identified education and
reconnus comme
training
des leviers
as
clés de
leverage
cette transformation et avec un
for such
décrochage scolaire qui a
transformation.
été
And they
identifié
had
comme un frein majeur à
identified
l'inclusion
school dropouts
sociale, à
as a
l'employabilité
major
des jeunes.
hurdle
Et donc,
to
on a fixé
youth and
dès le début des années
employability.
2000 à l'échelle européenne
Early
des objectifs de
2000s, at the
réduction
European
de sortie
level,
précoce du système éducatif. Un
a
premier objectif
policy was
en
agreed upon
2010
and
était de
implemented in order to fight
réduire à
early
10%
dropouts.
la part des jeunes de 18 à 24 ans
Initially, in
sortis précocement du
2010,
système
the
éducatif,
target was
mais on n'a pas réussi à
reduce
atteindre cet
this
objectif
number
et il a été
by
renouvelé pour
11%,
2020
and
et
then
pour 2030, une
it was
nouvelle
renewed
impulsion a
in
été donnée à
2020
l'échelle
and then in
européenne et on a
2030.
fixé un objectif de
The
réduction
latest
du taux de sortant
target is
précoce du
to
système éducatif
reduce the number
à
of
moins
early
de
dropouts
9%.
by
Alors, vous avez ici à
9%.
droite l'ensemble
Make
des
sure
pays de
that
l'Union
we have
européenne qui
less
sont
than
classés sur
9%
cet
by
indicateur
2030. And you can
de
see
taux
here
de
on the
sortant
right-hand side
précoce
of
du
my
système
slide
éducatif,
the number of
avec
young
donc
dropouts.
une moyenne européenne qui s'élève à
Comparing
9,5%
different countries,
et une grande
the
disparité
European
entre les pays,
average
puisqu'on voit
number
que
is around
cela va
9%.
de 2% en Croatie
And you
jusqu'à
can see that it
16,6%
ranges
en
between
Roumanie.
2%
Alors en
in
France,
Croatia
le niveau
to over
que nous connaissons
16%
du
in
décrochage
Romania.
est plutôt plus
France
favorable que d'autres pays.
is in
Nous
a
avons,
relatively better
nous avons
position than
obtenu des
other
progrès
countries.
notables
We have
depuis
made
plusieurs années,
considerable
depuis le début des
progress
années
over the
2010
past
avec une
couple of
politique
years,
très
especially
volontariste
since
de
early
lutte contre le décrochage scolaire.
2010s, where
Notre
there
taux de
was
sortie
a
précoce du système
very
éducatif est passé
strong political
de
willingness
2010 de 11,3% à 8,2% en 2018 et à 7,6% en
For
2023.
example,
Mais
in
ce taux
2010, that
évidemment est
early
vaste, cette
dropout
disparité
rate
territoriale très
stood at
importante. Nous avons des
11.3%
territoires en France qui
and
sont
progressed
très
to
touchés par le
8.2%
phénomène
in
du
2018 and
décrochage. Et puis ces 7,6%,
77.6%
ça
in
représente
2023.
à
Now,
l'échelle de
it
notre
might
pays
seem
420 000 jeunes.
like little,
Et
but
donc
it
c'est
still
assez
accounts for
considérable. Et même si nous avons
420,000 young
progressé et
people,
déjà
which is
atteint
still a very
l'objectif
large number. So even
fixé
if
par
we
l'Union
did
européenne, il nous
reach the
faut redoubler
target
d'efforts pour faire
number
mieux
set
ces
by
420 000
the
jeunes
European Union,
touchés
we
par le
still need to
décrochage,
do better. We need to
nous
improve the
y oblige.
situation. We need to work
Et
harder
d'ailleurs, nous
to make
aussi
sure
craignons
that
une augmentation
we can
prochaine du
reduce that number.
décrochage
Moreover, we
suite
believe that that
à la
figure
crise
might
Covid
actually go
et
up again
à ces
due
problèmes
to
de
the
santé
COVID
mentale que
crisis and
malheureusement
the
nous
amount
observons
of
beaucoup
mental
chez
health
chez les jeunes et qui
issues
peuvent
that were
être là un
caused
facteur
by
important
COVID and
de
that might
décrochage.
translate
Je vous propose de
into
rentrer maintenant dans le
early school
détail de
dropouts.
la
Now,
politique
if you
française
don't mind, let's go
avec la
deep
slide suivante.
into, next slide please, into the French
Merci
policy.
de passer la diapositive suivante.
So
Voilà.
next slide. There you go,
Je
perfect.
voudrais vraiment rebondir
And
sur
I would
les propos qui
like
ont été
to get back
tenus
to what
précédemment par
um,
Sylvia.
Sylvia was saying
Il y
earlier
a
on.
effectivement plusieurs facteurs qui peuvent expliquer le
There's a
décrochage, des
number
facteurs
of
liés
reasons for
aux
school
élèves eux-mêmes, aux
dropout.
jeunes eux-mêmes, la
Reasons that might have to
motivation,
do with
des
individuals,
problèmes
lack of
émotionnels, des
motivation,
problèmes
emotional
de confiance en
issues,
soi, des problèmes
issues
cognitifs,
having to do
et
with
puis
lack of
des
self-confidence or
facteurs liés à
cognitive
l'institution elle-même. Ça a
issues. But
été
there's
en
also a
France
number
une
of
grande prise de
reasons that have
conscience
to
dans
do
les
with the
années
institution
2010
itself.
que de se
Back
dire
in
que
the
l'institution pouvait
2010s,
générer du
A
décrochage
major
par des
shift
problèmes de climat
occurred
scolaire, par des
when
problèmes de pédagogie, de gestes
we, as
professionnels
a whole,
des enseignants.
realized
Et
that there were
c'est la raison pour
problems
laquelle
within
on
our
a souhaité
institutions having
répondre
to do
à
with
ces
the
cette problématique de
learning
décrochage de façon
climate,
globale, en
with
prenant en compte
lack of adequacy, and
ce
therefore
caractère
we decided
multifactoriel
to embrace
du
this
processus du décrochage.
to,
Et donc, en inscrivant des
in
actions
order
en
to try and
trois
tackle
axes,
all the different
la
dimensions.
prévention d'abord,
This is how
qui
we
correspond aux
identified
actions et
a
dispositifs visant
three-pronged
à encourager
approach. Number
la
one,
persévérance scolaire.
prevention.
C'est un
We want
terme
to
de persévérance,
encourage
on l'a
students
emprunté à
to
nos amis
stay at
québécois qui depuis
school. This is a
longtemps
notion that we
ont une
borrowed
approche
to Quebec,
positive,
French Canada.
responsabilisante, centrée sur l'élève du décrochage.
Our friends
Et
from
donc,
Quebec
pour
have
faire en sorte que les élèves
for
ne
quite a long
décrochent pas, eh bien,
time
il
been
faut
able
favoriser
to
les conditions de
focus
leur
on
approchage
guidance
et donc
support, educational
travailler
alliance with young
avec
people,
des enseignants bien formés, avec un climat
to
scolaire
reinforce teachers
qui favorise
training,
les
making sure
apprentissages,
that
en
everything
accompagnant aussi mieux les élèves à
is
l'orientation pour éviter des
done
orientations
in
subies,
order
en créant
to
également
make
autour de
sure
chaque jeune
that
des alliances
we
éducatives en faisant
empower
du lien avec les
students
familles.
to
Et
take
donc tout cela doit
better
contribuer
control
à
over
la
their own
persévérance scolaire
education
et
in order
contribuer à
to
prévenir le
encourage
décrochage.
stay in
Le
school.
deuxième axe de notre politique, c'est un axe
The
d'intervention. Il s'agit
second
d'intervenir
part of
très
our approach
rapidement dès les
is
premiers signes de
intervention. We want to
décrochage,
make sure
dès
that we
les
can
premières
intervene as
absences,
early as possible, as
dès qu'on
soon
observe
as
des difficultés
there are
lourdes
signs of
au
possible
niveau
dropout,
scolaire,
as soon
et on
as
peut y répondre de diverses façons, par des
learners
parcours
show
aménagés de
early
formation, par
signs,
des sessions de
we are able
remobilisation pour
to try
permettre aux
and
élèves
reintegrate, they
redonner du sens à leurs
remobilize it to
apprentissages
try and
et
help
les
them make sense
remotiver.
of their
Et puis
learning
le troisième
process
axe,
and
eh bien, c'est
improve
celui de la
motivation.
prévention,
Number
qui
three,
est un axe
remediation.
qui porte sur donc les actions qui remédient
This has
au
to do
décrochage, qui s'adresse
with
donc aux jeunes en
correcting
rupture affective de
dropout
parcours.
phenomena
Il
when
s'agit là
young
d'offrir
learners
eh
have
bien, une offre
already come
diversifiée de
out of the
solutions
school
dans
system. We
l'éducation
want to
nationale. Nous
try
avons
and
développé par
offer
exemple
a
les
variety of
micro-lycées
different
qui
solutions.
proposent des
We have a
pédagogies
number of
différentes, innovantes
micro
et qui permettent
educational
donc
schools,
de
lycées,
raccrocher
in order to
les
try
élèves.
and
Nous avons des partenaires au niveau
bring
local
back
de la formation
learners. We also have a
qui
number of
proposent
local
aussi d'autres
partners which offer
solutions
a
de
variety of other
retour en formation.
solutions in order
Et toutes
to
ces solutions,
retrain
donc, eh bien, sont
dropouts.
proposées aux jeunes en
This
fonction
whole
de leurs
net
besoins.
of
Et il
solutions
s'agit
is
vraiment de
offered on
répondre de
a
façon personnalisée
need-based
à
approach
ces
in order to come up with bespoke
situations très
solutions
différentes d'un jeune à l'autre
and to be as
de
adaptive as
décrochage.
possible when it comes
La
to
slide
young dropouts.
suivante, s'il
Next
vous plaît.
slide, please.
Alors, je voudrais vraiment insister sur le fait que
I
la
would
politique que
like
nous menons en France
to
est une politique
insist on the fact that the French
partenariale
policy is based on
qui mobilise
partnerships.
vraiment un très grand nombre
What we're
d'acteurs
trying to
à
do is to
toutes
bring
les
together as
billes
many actors as
de
possible and
l'organisation
in a
administrative et du
wide-ranging
pilotage de la
way
lutte contre le décrochage scolaire. D'abord, au
in
niveau
order to
national,
fight
c'est une
dropout
politique qui est
phenomena.
portée par l'ensemble
At the
du
national
gouvernement.
level, this
Une
is
politique
something that brings
interministérielle
together
qui
every aspect
mobilise
of
tout
the government,
particulièrement, bien
so
sûr,
all ministries.
plusieurs ministères, dont le
Of
ministère
course, a
de
number
l'Éducation
of
nationale,
ministries
mais
are
pas
at the
seulement,
forefront,
le ministère
including
du Travail, le
Education
ministère
Ministry, but
en
also
charge de
Employment, Labour
l'Agriculture,
Ministry, as well
puisque
as
au sein de ce
Agriculture
ministère, il y
Ministry,
a un
since
enseignement
they
agricole avec
have
des élèves qui peuvent décrocher dans
a
cet enseignement.
department
Eh bien,
that
donc ces
is
ministères
dedicated to
collaborent
agricultural teaching.
pour
All of
piloter
those
les actions de
ministries,
lutte
all of
contre
those
le décrochage
departments
scolaire.
work
Au
together
niveau
in
le
order
plus
to
local,
fight
c'est-à-dire
dropout.
dans
That's at
les
the national
établissements scolaires
level. At
eux-mêmes,
the local level,
on
in
a créé, mis
schools,
en place des groupes de prévention du
we
décrochage
also have
scolaire
created a
qui
number of
réunissent des
anti-dropout steering
acteurs
groups.
aux
We
compétences
try to make sure
complémentaires,
that we have as
variées, des
many
professeurs,
and as
des
varied a
acteurs de la
selection of
sphère
professionals as
médico-sociale,
possible, people
de
from
la
the
sphère éducative.
social health background, people from teaching backgrounds.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez cette fois?
Can you hear
Vous êtes de
me?
retour,
Yes.
Philippe, c'est parfait.
Yes, you're back.
Et
Wonderful.
voilà,
Vraiment
c'est
désolé.
voilà, il nous
Terribly
reste
sorry.
4-5 minutes si vous pouvez.
Okay,
Oui,
so you have
je
maybe 4 or
vais,
5
bien sûr,
minutes
je vais
left,
veiller
if you
à
may,
dépasser
if
le
you
temps.
could.
Donc une politique
Okay.
partenariale, je le disais, et au
So
niveau
a
des
partnership
établissements,
policy with
de prévention du décrochage
establishments,
scolaire et un
with
référent
a group to prevent
décrochage
school
scolaire.
dropouts,
Des acteurs qui, au niveau local, de
and
manière
then local actors
infradépartementale, sont organisés en réseau. Il y a
At
un réseau
local
de
level,
tous
there's
les
a
établissements
network of
scolaires
all
qui
school
couvre plusieurs communes,
establishments,
qu'on appelle le réseau
which
formation et
covers several
qualification emploi. Et
municipalities.
puis le réseau
So
des
for
plateformes de suivi et
jobs, and
d'appui aux
then there
décrocheurs,
are
réseau
platforms
qui
for monitoring
associe
people who have
le
left
réseau
school.
focal de l'éducation nationale, mais aussi tous les partenaires locaux
And this
de
includes all
la
local
formation et
partners,
de
such
l'insertion des jeunes,
as, well,
et donc
who are
ces partenaires
work
qui
in
peuvent proposer
training
une
young
offre
people.
de
And so these are
solutions
partners who
aux
could
jeunes
provide
décrocheurs
solutions to
suffisamment
young people who
diversifiés
have
pour
left
répondre
school.
à la
And it's a
diversité des besoins.
diversified
Et puis
offer to
cette
meet the
politique, elle est
diversity of
partenariale
needs. And
aussi
then
avec
this
les régions, les
partnership
collectivités
policies
territoriales
also
qui
at
sont
the
chargées depuis 2015
regional level.
de
Since
coordonner les
2015, the
actions de lutte
regions
contre le
have been in
décrochage
charge
scolaire au titre
of
de leur
coordinating
responsabilité en
efforts
matière
to fight
de soutien au
against
développement économique et
early
de
school
formation
leavers,
professionnelle. Diapositive
and they
suivante, s'il vous
train the
plaît.
professionals.
Cette coordination d'acteurs, elle
So
s'appuie
this
sur un système d'information
this is all
dédié,
based on
le système
a
interministériel
dedicated
d'échange d'informations qui a été mis en place dès
interministerial
2011
information
en France et
exchange
qui nous
system that
a
was set up in
beaucoup
2011
aidé
in
à
France, which has
repérer
been extremely
les
useful
décrochages, les
in
décrocheurs. Ce
spotting young
système, il
people
s'appuie
leaving
sur
school, and the
des
system is
déclarations de
based
sortants qui sont faites dans
on
les établissements scolaires. Vous voyez à gauche,
declarations when
et
a child leaves school.
donc les noms
The
des
declaration of
élèves
early school leavers
sont
in the
transmis
pupil
au système
database.
et on va
Their names
regarder
are
si l'élève qui
added
est
to the
sorti
centralized
de tel
system, and then
établissement, eh bien, on le
when
retrouve dans un autre établissement
a
à
child has left
l'échelle
an
de
establishment,
l'académie,
then
à
you
l'échelle plus
see
globale
if
du
they're in
pays
any
tout
other
entier. Et on
establishments
regarde aussi s'il n'est pas dans une
or
autre
school
base
sectors, or perhaps in a
portée
different
par un
database
autre ministère, une base
within a
de la
different
formation en
ministry
apprentissage, la base
for somebody
aussi
in training,
de
for
l'emploi
example,
avec des
or
structures
a
d'accompagnement des jeunes
jobs
vers l'emploi, les missions
portal,
locales qui
local missions,
saisissent des
etc.,
informations concernant les jeunes
who may
qui
be
les
in charge
accompagnent. Et
of
donc,
training
ce
them and
croisement de
accompanying
données eh bien,
them.
permet
So
d'aboutir
being
à une
able to
liste de
access all these
jeunes qui
databases
sont
provides us
potentiellement
with
en
a list of
situation de
young people who,
décrochage
could
lorsqu'on ne les
potentially
retrouve
be in a
nulle part.
situation of
Et
having
cette liste de
left
jeunes, eh bien, elle
school
est transmise
and
à
not
une
and
plateforme
being neat,
de suivi et d'appui aux
basically.
décrocheurs, la PSAD, la plateforme
And
donc, qui
then
regroupe
the
tous les
PSAD
partenaires au niveau
comes into
local pour
play. So
proposer
this brings together
des
all local
solutions. Et donc, cette
partners
plateforme
to
contacte les jeunes
provide solutions.
et
The platform
examine
reaches
leur
out to the
situation
young
et leur
people,
propose une
examines their
solution
situation,
adaptée.
and offers an
Mais
adapted
ce
solution.
SIEI, il
However,
comporte un certain nombre de
the
limites.
SIEI does have its
D'abord,
limits. First of all,
ce repérage n'est fait que ponctuellement. Au départ, c'était 2 fois
they
dans l'année.
only
Depuis 2022, nous avons
assess
progressé, nous le
the
faisons
status of
cette
each
fois-ci tous
student
les mois.
twice
Mais tous les
yearly.
mois,
Formerly, it used to
c'est
be
pas
every month,
suffisant.
but
Et c'est pour ça que je vais vous le présenter
even that is
après.
not
Nous avons souhaité
enough.
progresser
So we
pour être
decided that we
plus,
would make
pour faire
progress on
un
this
repérage plus
to try
fréquent.
to spot these
Ensuite, l'autre
children
limite, c'est que les jeunes
earlier.
repérés
And
on
then
vient
also
qu'à
young
partir de
people who
16 ans,
have been
c'est-à-dire
spotted,
au
it's
moment où
only
l'école
once
n'est
they've
plus
reached the age of
obligatoire. Les jeunes avant
16
16
when
ans qui
school is no
décrochent,
longer
eh bien,
mandatory.
sont
So children who
des
leave
jeunes
school
qui
before the age of
relèvent de
16
l'obligation scolaire et donc sont traités au titre de
are the
l'absentéisme
responsibility of
et on ne les
school, and
repère
so
pas
they
par
are
ce
treated
système
as
d'information. Et puis ce
being
système, eh bien, il
absent.
comporte des
And then
doublons, il
also
comporte des
there are
faux décrocheurs, des décrocheurs
redundancies, there are
repérés à tort, ou à l'inverse, des
people who
jeunes
are spotted as
non
having left
repérés.
school when in
Et tout
fact they
cela ne
haven't,
permet
or
pas
children who have
d'avoir des
left and who aren't
statistiques
in
très
the
robustes.
system.
Et donc, l'outil est
So it's
imparfait.
difficult
C'est
to
la
have
raison pour
very
laquelle nous
robust
souhaitons
statistics, and this is
progresser
why we
et
would
en
like to make
transformant
progress in
le
this
système
area
d'information.
and
Et
to
c'est ce que je vais
overhaul our
vous
information
montrer sur
system. And this is what I will now
slide
be
suivante qui
showing
sera
you in my next
la
slide,
dernière
which will be my
diapositive que je
last.
vais présenter. Donc, une politique que nous avons souhaité
So we
renforcer
wished to strengthen our
à partir de
policy.
2020 déjà,
So starting in
avec la mise en place
2020
d'une
already,
obligation de
we
formation pour tous les
implemented
jeunes
all
de 16
obligatory
à
training for all
18
young
ans.
people between the ages of 16
Vraiment
and
une mesure
18.
très forte
And this is
qui
a
a
very
été
strong
instituée, où
measure
on a changé de
that
paradigme.
was implemented.
Auparavant,
We
on
completely
repérait les
changed the
décrocheurs et on leur
paradigm.
proposait
Before,
de
we
revenir. Nous
spotted
avons même en
school
2015
leavers and
institué
then
un
suggested
droit
that
au
they
retour
come
en
back.
formation,
And
mais
we even
le jeune disposait
established
ou
the
non de ce
right
droit.
to
À
to
partir
return
de
to
2020,
trading,
on a
but
souhaité
children could choose whether
obliger
they
les jeunes
wanted to follow this or
à
not. And then in
être
2020, we
accompagnés
decided that we would make
ou
it
en formation entre
mandatory
16 et
for
18 ans pour
children
garantir leur
between the ages
accès
of
à
16
une
and 18
qualification.
have
Alors
mandatory
cette
training
obligation, elle s'adresse aux
so
jeunes,
that they
bien
receive
sûr, mais
skills
aussi
training. And
à
this is for young
l'institution elle-même.
people,
Cela
but
nous a
also for
obligés à
institutions
les
themselves,
repérer
because this forced
tous
us
de façon
to
fiable et à les
make an
accompagner
inventory of
vers des
all children
solutions
who had left
school and then
ou en
to
formation
accompany them
qui
towards solutions, either back
correspondent
into
à leurs besoins.
training or
Et
something that would really
pour
meet
être
their
plus
needs.
efficace, eh bien,
And then to
nous
be
avons
even more
décidé de
effective,
transformer
we
notre
decided
système
to
d'information.
completely
Un système
overhaul our
d'information qui est
information
représenté
system.
ici
This was a
avec
system
à gauche
represented
d'abord
here. On the left, first of all,
une application
an app to prevent children from leaving school. So each school establishment identifies children at risk of leaving school early, children who, or pupils who show early warning systems. They're absent, their grades are dropping, they seem to lack motivation, etc. So all of this sends out an alert to the school establishment so that the teaching team can take measures before the child leaves school. And then if the child does indeed leave school, then they have to add the names. Well, it's still being overhauled, so it's not quite finished yet, but they will change the status of the pupil so that we can have more robust information with the SAS, which crosses all of the data with all available databases so that these young people can be found, those who have left school. And also with new technologies which allow us to reduce redundancies and to ensure that the children who are stated to have left school have indeed left school. So all of the information, when it's ready, will be added to a community database for all local actors within the coordination body with a monitoring platform, the PSAD, and all actors very soon will be able to connect to this database and to interact with the database. So to query it, to know who the new children are who have left school, and also to transmit information, monitoring data, possible solutions suggested or implemented for these young people. So you can see the arrows go both ways. So to facilitate the work and allow us to be much more effective at all levels. And this also provides us with statistic indicators to be able to monitor pupils at every level, and then locally as well as at the level of the region and national level. And these indicators, of course, are extremely useful to devise our strategies to prevent children from leaving school. So we hope this will be up and running in 2026. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Philippe. And this brings us to our next presentation. And we will hear your colleague from Costa Rica, who has the same position as Philippe, but in the Ministry of Education in Costa Rica, in charge of preventing early leaving. And they have a very strong database and information system to spot these children and an early warning system. So this will allow us to compare the two models and the two visions. Thank you very much, Philippe. Over to you, Irving.
Bien, pues primero que nada, muchísimas gracias en nombre del
First of
Ministerio de
all,
Educación Pública de Costa
I
Rica
want to thank
al
you,
IPE por esta
and
invitación.
also in the
Al
name
igual que
of
Philippe,
the
haré
Ministry
el
of Education
esfuerzo
in Costa
por
Rica. Like
tratar de
Irving,
condensar en pocos
I will do
minutos
my
lo que ha
best
sido
to
la
try to
experiencia de
speak
nuestro país.
briefly and to explain
Solamente
to
me
you the
confirman
experience in my country.
que
Just
pueda
let me
ver
know that
la
you can see my
presentación para
slides,
iniciar.
and then I can start.
Perfecto.
Yes, we can
Bien,
see it.
voy a
Great.
hablarles acerca de lo
Today,
que
I'm
en
going to
nuestro
talk to
país
you
hemos venido
about what
desarrollando
we have
para
developed in my
promover la
country
permanencia estudiantil y
in order to
particularmente
promote
cómo mitigar los
students
efectos de
to
la
stay in
exclusión
school
educativa.
and also to address educational
Antes, tal vez para
exclusion.
las personas que están más conectadas a este debate, hablarles de características generales de
So
nuestro
when
sistema
I
educativo.
talk
Costa
to those that
Rica
are
para este
online in
año
this
tiene
debate,
un reporte de un
I
poco
want
más de un
to let
millón
you
de
know that Costa
personas en el
Rica
sistema educativo
has an
que están
enrollment
distribuidos en 5
number
ofertas que van
of
desde la
almost more than a
educación
million students,
preescolar o
and
de
there are
primera
5
infancia
educational
hasta la
offers that
educación
go
de
from
personas
preschool
jóvenes y adultas.
to
Nuestra organización
the education of young
administrativa
people and
cuenta con
adults.
3
And then also
viceministerios,
our
15 direcciones de
organization or
nivel
ministry has
central,
3 vice
27
ministries,
direcciones
15
de
central
nivel regional
directorates,
y
27
un
regional
poco más de
directorates,
5.000
and
centros educativos, de los
over
cuales
1,000
600 son
public and
privados. Si
private
alguien quisiera
educational centers.
consultar cada
600
una de
are
estas
private centers.
instituciones, ver su georreferencia, pues queda en
If
la
you want to see
presentación,
where these are
precisamente lo dejo
located,
ahí
you
a manera
can look at the
de
map
referencia.
on my slide,
Pues
a
bien,
slide
para
as
hablar
a
de
reference.
los sistemas de alerta temprana, creo que lo primero que
So
tenemos que
when
hacer es
addressing
contar
early dropout signs, we can see what Costa Rica has done in the past few years. We have been working on that for a long time. Due to the results, Costa Rica has decided to carry out a number of efforts to also promote all the policies related to students staying in school. And what we're looking to do is to diminish the effects of exclusion, and we try to tackle 3 areas. First of all, permanence, so that students do not drop out of school and that they pursue their education goals. Then we have to talk about exclusion, so how to help those that have been excluded from the system. How can we do this? Who are the ones that partake in these efforts? We try to interlink different levels of responsibility. So we work from a central level to a regional and supranational level. And of course, we also work in education centers. Our operational efforts have led to the creation of different teams in our regions and also in all educational institutions. Obviously, each institute, each student is part of that network that has been created. Additionally, there are several items of a multisectoral scope, and because this is an issue that is caused by several topics, we need to address the issue in a multisectoral way as well. Exclusion happens because of many variables, and in order to tackle all of the issues, we need to also have a multisectorial effort. This has led to the creation of different protocols, different guidelines, and with this, we have different inputs so our teams can work year after year, and also we can create a set of guidelines for future projects. All the documents are available on the website that you can see on the slide, and you can take a look whenever you want to do so. So this tools for educational policies have led to the creation to a policy that we haven't been implemented since 2015, an early warning tool, but in 2022, we updated the program. This happened through an automated module that all our education centers use. This works not only for enrollment and to see which students are still going to school, but also to send out alerts of students that are at risk of dropping out. And we do this through the Saber platform, and this allows us to make decisions in the ministry. The early warning tool, or SAT, helps each education center to register over 85 different risks or alerts. As you can see, our early warning tool is based on variables. These variables are translated into different topics, and we set categories depending on whether the conditions are external or internal, and this allows us to map the issue of exclusion. This is how we can then create different action plans to help our students. In this module, we were able to trace the attention that each education center carries out.
To give you an example, the data that we have created allows us to have different views or different inputs of how the education system is working. This is only a reference, but we can also create heat maps and create and know which all are the early warning signs and where they are taking place. And this is how we send different responses and different actions from the institutions. On the screen, you can see an example. This is how we can map and what the different signs are in each institution. As you can see, some alerts are related to lack of student transport, poverty, low education levels in the family, etc. There is a plethora of different risks. We can finally have a very tailored response to all the early warning signs. So how does this help us prevent exclusion? Maybe I can conclude this way, but maybe I should mention something that is important. Data is extremely important to make decisions, and education policies need to be based through evidence. This is something that needs to be amplified in my region. Also, this type of analysis and information can allow us to structure our different strategic processes. Philippe mentioned the importance of intervening at different levels. This allows us to identify the educational support required by the student population, which what this means is that there are general actions for all the population, but there are also specific actions at the level of the education centers or at a regional level, so we can focus on specific issues. We can even be as specific as tailoring a response per student. An education center can see which students have early warning signs and which problems are creating the issue of school dropout. Then each situation allows us to identify the types of support that we can provide, what type of collaborations we need to do with other institutions, and this has allowed us for an interoperability between different systems. Once again, it's the interoperability with other information systems. So what we do in the Ministry of Education is to link with the regional SINAUE in Costa Rica. Also, a couple of years ago, the money transfers that the Institute of Social Aid has given allows to help the Ministry of Public Education. What does this do? It helps us pinpoint which students are struggling in their education process. The population, when we can identify the population at risk, we can carry out different actions to help them. Then we also have a system that can register all the data. I believe that also we should plan based on results. We need to have an evidence-based decision making. I think that in the previous presentation there was also mentioned that we also need to consolidate a culture of registration and pay attention to risk factors. This is not only something important for Costa Rica, but we have noticed that if we have live data, we can register everything that is happening. This can alleviate the impact of different issues. We can automate certain processes. There are some institutions that are oversaturated, and this leads us to our next challenge, which is raising awareness. This is a challenge for any institution, any ministry, any education, the Ministry of Education, and we need to constantly promote student attendance. We need to keep track of all changes, as I mentioned, and finally, we need to break paradigms. This means that we need to disassemble certain older systems. This is what happens in our region. At least we work in silos, and we do not perceive ourselves as an institution that needs to work in a collaborative manner. This is a permanent challenge, that is to bring the technical and the political closer together. To conclude, all of this means that Costa Rica currently has education exclusion of around 1.5% if we take into account all types of education for adults, young children, etc. That the number becomes 2.1%. 16,000 of these people are young adults and children. This is our main challenge, and I can conclude with this. Once again, thank you very much for having me here today. Have a good day.
Gracias, Irving. There is indeed,
Thank
I
you,
think,
Irving.
a lot of commonalities in the two presentations from Philippe and from Irving, even if we are in two clear different contexts about the strengths of information systems, about the importance of having some articulations between the different levels of the education systems from an information and data perspective, but also in terms of coordination of action, and also the multi-sector approach. And maybe we will have the opportunity to come back to that as part of the discussion. But now the perspective that has been given by Irving, focusing on Costa Rica, my colleague Fernanda Luna from IP office in Latin America is going to provide a broader perspective in Latin America on those early warning signals that we have heard, focusing on Costa Rica, but she's going to give us a broader regional perspective. So over to you, Fernanda.
Muriel, ¿se ve bien la presentación?
Can you see my presentation?
Yeah, you have to put it full mode and it will
Yes,
be...
yes, yes. I actually... And, okay. Sorry.
Okay, can you
Yeah,
see it?
Yeah, está bien.
It's okay?
No, juste, ya, y configuración de visualización.
Yes.
Aquí, y cambiar entrevista, moderador y presentación. Voilà,
Right
perfecto.
now?
Sí, perfecto.
Hola. Bueno, buenos días y muchas gracias por la
Good
invitación a
morning,
este
and
espacio.
thank
Es un
you
gusto compartir este panel con
for
especialistas
inviting me here
profesionales
today. It's
profesionales
a
de tan alto
pleasure
nivel.
to
Voy a arrancar diciendo
talk
que
to
desde
you
UNESCO
with
venimos
the
haciendo un fuerte
IIP as well. And
acompañamiento
I
a la
want to say
Comisión de
that at
Educación de la
UNESCO we
región en
have
el fortalecimiento de la
been
sociedad
trying
información
to
para la gestión educativa en tres
strengthen
grandes
all of
frentes:
efforts
producción de
for
conocimiento, asistencia
educational
técnica y
strategy.
formación de funcionarios. En esta
We
última
have been
línea
trying to
específicamente
train
venimos
our
trabajando
policymakers
en el desarrollo
as
de
well,
capacidades
and
estatales para
we
la
are currently
mejora del
working
uso
on
de
the
datos,
development
el
of
planeamiento y la
state
gestión de políticas educativas.
skills
Y
to
es en este
help with
marco,
the
en este marco
management
que hoy
of
quiero compartir una
education
mirada general
policies,
sobre los
and this
sistemas de
is why
alerta
today I want
temprana.
to give you a regional
Pasamos de la
overview
mirada de
of
los
our
países
early
a una
warning
mirada regional,
system.
¿no? En esta instancia.
So we're
Les
now
voy a empezar
taking
contando qué avances se
a
han
broader
logrado,
look,
qué tipo de
a
sistemas
regional
están en
view.
marcha y
So I
también
want to talk to
cuáles son
you
los
about
principales
what
desafíos
actions are
y lentas
in
que se tienen
place
que
and what
enfrentar en
are
este
the
sentido.
challenges that we have been
Sabemos que
facing.
en los últimos 20 años América Latina ha logrado avances
In the
significativos en
past
el
20
acceso a la
years,
educación y
Latin
las
America and the
tasas de
Caribbean
diversidad
has made
escolar,
sustained progress
pero
in
estos
school
avances no han sido
completion rates.
suficientes para
However,
garantizar la
these
finalización
challenges
universal
are
de
not
los niveles
enough
secundarios
to
ni la calidad de los aprendizajes, tal como
guarantee
mostraba Silvia
reaching the
recién,
end of
¿no? Algunos datos para
education,
poner en contexto.
that is
Mientras
finishing
que el
secondary school.
96% de los
And
estudiantes
to give you some more
finalizan nivel
data,
primario, solo el 71.5% termina la secundaria.
only
Entonces, ¿qué significan estos
71% of
24
our students
puntos
finish
de
secondary
jerarquía?
school.
Bueno, humanicemos
So
estos
why do
datos.
we
Son
have
miles
such
de
a
jóvenes que el sistema
large
escolar
gap What we notice is that some students do not receive proper help, and then they end up dropping out of school. This is official data. And what worries us is how this dropout is distributed. We can see that only 44% of the lowest income quintile reaches high income after completing secondary education. The rates are also quite low for students with disabilities, indigenous language speakers, and immigrants. So we have a large disparity that is not only difficult for our early warning systems, as the previous panelist said. This is also due to the structural differences in the education system. Within this context, we have early warning signs or systems that can help us identify the reasons of dropouts, and it also helps us find ways to help the most vulnerable populations. So the early warning systems have become a tool to protect school trajectories and identify students at risk. And these systems can be understood with two main components. Problem detection through technological and data management dimension. We have different information tools, so we can, for instance, have statistical reports and examine different variables. The other component is educational planning. This means policy intervention that happens after we have found the data. We find the creation of protocols and strategies that are implemented in schools and through the central education system, an intermediate education system. According to a study that we did at UNESCO, we started registering disparities before the pandemic that then broadened or became larger after the pandemic. There were issues that appeared in Peru, Honduras, and then Argentina also faced issues in 2021. So the region has has an advanced stage of development, but we also can see large disparities. There are information systems that do not communicate or translate from country to country. So this is the context that we face in our region today. If we want to talk about the technology dimension, data management, something important is identifying risks. We need to see which students are more likely to drop out. So we have two models. We have one that is based on fixed criteria. So this uses a set of data like lack of attendance, low grades, etc. These are very efficient and we can act very quickly. We can see this model in Uruguay, Costa Rica, Colombia, Honduras, and El Salvador. In Uruguay, the warning system is automated, but we also have manual signs like problems within the family and others. Costa Rica, as Irving mentioned, also has certain indicators that have a strong regional component. Then we have the predictive models based on AI and machine learning. Algorithms are trained to identify who is at risk of dropping out. They're very specific, but they're only more complex to implement. There are bigger technological challenges and technical issues, ethical problems when it comes to data management. We can see these are used in Chile, Peru, and other regional contexts. So if no one is taking action, the risk doesn't change. This is why it is very important to take action. So what happens once we receive this alert? There are differences from country to country. Once again, this depends to the way in which the state organizes itself. So the importance of schools and school autonomy and models with general guidelines. So these models give us general guidelines by level of risk, and schools can choose the most appropriate strategies. This is the case of Uruguay. So we have different progress, and we can specify the systems by the student, by teacher, etc. Then we can modify our response according to the institutional context. Then we also have models with territorial and intersectoral intervention. This model works with the different levels of the education system and works alongside the state. And it assesses factors that can lead to dropping out, and this is the case of Chile. Chile uses this model. And then once we have the system in place, we can help families, and then we establish different state protocols. We try to have flexible education methods as well. The third model is a hybrid model. This combines both models that I just described. This is the case with Costa Rica, and they combine school autonomy with central education systems. So here you can see that the responses are multisectoral and varied. There is psychological support, then there are extracurricular activities, financial aid, transport aid, among others. Honduras is another example of a hybrid model.
Si el riesgo está calificado en bajo, medio, alto, y ahí depende cómo sea el riesgo, interviene distintos niveles.
Depending on the level of risk, different actors will play. Therefore, we can see that we do not only need a technical model, but we need to respond or provide a response based on a context.
Ahora bien, esa misma diversidad de contextos y de capacidades también pone en evidencia una serie de desafíos.
The wide array of contexts also shows that there are different ways to carry out our actions in the region. I'm only going to highlight certain phrases here. An important thing is that we need to have the necessary conditions to register our data. There are systems that do not have enough data, so it's different to carry out proper surveillance in the long term. Then we also sometimes have a lack of institutional capacity to use the data. And also there is a lack of regulation or lack of regulatory frameworks to access data. Then I want to talk about a problem with the design. It's better to sometimes opt out of using more complex systems and use more simple systems. And in order to overcome this issue, we need to have a higher level of monitoring, know the level of flexibility of each model. Third of all, I want to talk about an important tension is that for these systems to work, schools need to follow through as well with the early warning systems. We need to guarantee different resources and guidelines so that we can respond in a sustainable manner. Finally, and just to conclude, for these systems to work, we need to carry out our operations. We need to give priority to vulnerable populations, and this is where I'm going to stop.
Thanks a lot, Fernanda, and for everyone for your information. Our office in Latin America is currently developing a research related to this topic, and on more globally the topic on learning equity in collaboration with Sylvia that you heard first, and so please keep posted to get more information about it. Now we are going to move to our last speaker, and who is going to give us a different perspective on this topic, that is the one from civil society. Learning equity is a complex issue, multi-dimensional issues. Often it is said that there should be some social mobilizations to be in capacity to address it. Hence, the importance also of having civil society on boards and to share the perspective. That's why we've asked Evelyn, who is part of the ECOSI coalition of civil society organizations in Zimbabwe, to share her perspective. So over to you, Evelyn.
Okay, thank you and good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon.
Can you try again? Share again.
Are you able to see my screen now?
No, you should try to share again.
Oh, okay. Are you able to see it now?
No, it's okay. If you put it full screen, it's okay.
Okay. Thank you very much and good day, everyone. I'm Watanai from the Education Coalition of Zimbabwe, and I'll be sharing with you the dropouts, what causes dropouts in Zimbabwe, the strategies that we have used in civil society organizations, the challenges and the successes that we have faced in Zimbabwe. And because it's a membership-driven organization which works with civil societies who are into education advocacy. We are also a beneficiary of Education Out Loud, receiving funds from Global Partnership for Education, and we have the privilege of being part of the capacity building. And we work closely with the members of parliament as they play their oversight role. We also have support from ANTEFA, which is the African Network Campaign for Female Education, and Global Campaign for Education. As we do our work, there are a lot of reasons that contribute to the dropout of learners in Zimbabwe. And I have only picked the one which is topical as a result of COVID-19 and how we have managed to come up with different strategies. Some of the reasons for dropping out includes financial, economical, abscondment from school. But as a result of the COVID-19, we realized that there was an increase in terms of the dropouts as a result of pregnancy. And 47%, according to the UNICEF report, showed that there was an increase of dropouts of girls, adolescent girls ages 18 to 19. And we realized that the EMIS report that was available spoke to the issue of nearly 10,000 girls dropping out as a result of pregnancy. And the existing circulars within the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education were last reviewed in 1999, which protects the safeguarding of children to be able to continue and complete education. So the screenshot that I had taken looked at the aspect of who was responsible to ensure that the second chance education for learners who drop out of school in the education system. And this was as a result that the teacher and the parents and the school head should come to agreement if they so wish. So there was no clear cross-cutting circular. As we are doing our advocacy and ensuring that there is equity in education, there is also access to quality education. We felt that our advocacy needs to have research and evidence-based information so that as we reach out to the government officials, we have a stance and realistic information of what is happening within the system. Because we rely on the Education Management Information System, which is the EMIS, which is produced by the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education. But as a result of COVID-19, the trigger factors for dropping out of school got broader. So when we did our barrier analysis, it then gave us an insight on different causes of dropout in the education system. We went further to say what strategy can be used. The girls took up the ownership to lead in this journey. We went on to have girls in local advocacy, starting at grassroots level, coming to provincial, and then we have the national discussion advocacy. So on the national advocacy strategy, we were now bringing different like-minded organizations to come in with different strategies that they are using to ensure that the right to education of learners is being looked at. We were not gender biased, looking at the girl child leading the process, because as a result of pregnancy, for example, and the cultural dynamics, it really affects more the girl child. And some of the boys also drop out of school as a result of being young fathers. We also went further to support formulation of education regulations as civil society organization, complementing the government effort, realizing the need of different aspects. And then in this process, as we were ensuring that the right to education was being attained, girls needed to speak out for themselves to ensure that they will be able to continue and complete education in a safe environment. We started by having the scorecard process, whereby the young girls would come up with the challenges that they were facing, prioritize how they would want them to be resolved, and come up with a linear system whereby there will be interface with community members to ensure that there's acceptance at community level and there is buy-in to support to ensure that second chance education is accepted. As we are looking at the role of civil society, our work needs to be evidence-based, and media plays a critical role as we are doing our advocacy. As you see from those pictures, we managed to have girls speaking out using the languages that they feel comfortable to ensure that they receive second chance education. We also have the former Minister of Education having an interface with girls and making a commitment to ensure that second chance education is attained, and they're going to make different avenues to ensure that the right to education is not left behind. We also went further to have engagement with different stakeholders, because as we are doing advocacy, we have learned that local leadership play a critical role to ensure that the education system is acceptable by all. In the system of Zimbabwe, when local leadership says things, most people accept. In the education system, we have the teachers who we were lobbying to say, help us to ensure that there is retention, reduction, and continuation of education. How do we ensure that they are able to readmit the pregnant girls or the dropouts in the education system? To fight the issue of stigma. So we're working closely with the teacher unions as they were raising different issues to say, if someone has dropped out of school going into artisanal mining, what then happens? Are they going to be safe as they come back to school? If a learner is dropped out of school because of economic hardship, will we be able to support this as teachers? We then roped in to say, we need to have an interface with the government of Zimbabwe, working closely with the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education to say, as they are tracking the enrollment of learners, how do we ensure that they bring about systems for continuity and completion of education and strong monitoring ideas, ensure that the girls and the boys are able to continue and complete education, and we reduce the number of dropouts. The Parliament of Zimbabwe plays an oversight role in the education system. And what they usually advocate for comes into flourish. We have to take them on board in this journey of having the education system leaving no one behind, quoting the Constitution of Zimbabwe, quoting the Amendment Act to say, this is what your policies say, and ensuring that the right to education is being. They'll then look at different aspects to say, how do we ensure that the learning environment is safe and ensure that the girls are able to continue their education? We were looking at a future whereby a girl who has been impregnated is able to come back and join the system and is not being stigmatized. I have also selected one picture of the beneficiaries that we've been working with and some of the projects our partners are implementing. This was specifically Kai. But advocacy is a process, and the issue of statistical information, the issue of buy-in, competing, and the issue of competing activities is very critical. What do we prioritize to ensure that, is it important for the education sector to be prioritized, or the health sector should be prioritized? So we continued to have our evidence and engagement with the government. And some of the challenges that we face as civil society include delayed buy-in by government. To say, yes, you are prioritizing that the dropout rates needs to reduce, but this comes in with the need for resources to ensure that there is continuity in the education sector and they stay in school. Because as learners drop out of school is sometimes the issue of poverty, the inability to pay for the education system. Because our education system in Zimbabwe is not free. It's going to be progressively free. You pay for you to attain education. We also have different religious and cultural and social norms which affect the continuation of education of both learners, both boys and girls. This now come in to say, on this particular day, our learners will not go to school and priority is given to this gender. So breaking these barriers is some of the challenges that we face as we are doing our advocacy to reduce dropouts in the education system. Furthermore, we are also looking at the lack of community support, because if someone is a double orphan, it's no longer the system where there is continuous support network within the community. The child-headed families are exposed to not being able to continue with the education. Hence, they end up dropping out of school. The community will not be able to support their needs, especially the education system. For pregnant girls who would have gave birth, the challenge that affect them is they are not able to continue their education because there is lack of childcare support. Who will stay behind as the learner is going back into the system? However,
Lynn, if you can finish in 1 minute so that we have a bit of time for discussion.
Okay, thank you. We are celebrating in Zimbabwe that through the advocacy, there is constitutional and policy alignment which has taken place. Our constitution is for 2030. Our Education Amendment Act is for 2020. And then we go further to say a number of statutory instruments have been put on board. And for 2025, we are celebrating number 18 of 2025, which allows pregnant girls to remain in school, which is aligning with the Constitution. We also celebrate the partnership within the membership of the coalition, the support from GPE, the early warning system, which focuses on the 3 R's: readmit, retain, and reduce the dropping out of learners, despite that they are boys, girls. We also accept the whole of government approach as we are looking at adolescent pregnancy multisectorial response to ensure that no one is left behind. In summation, I believe that what we have done in Zimbabwe in terms of ensuring that education continues is through determination, the whole of government approach, stakeholders and unions coming together, seeing that the education system is what will make it, not leaving anyone behind, and creating a more equitable world where every child realizes the importance of education. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Evelyn. And sorry for wrapping up a little bit, but it's just to keep a bit of time for the Q&A. So we receive quite a number of questions, as you've seen in the chat, colleagues. A number of those referring to the information systems that are behind those early warning systems that were shared, especially by Philippe and Irvin, but also a bit with you, Evelyn, in the last presentation. And so some of the colleagues are asking, well, you've been presenting strong information systems that are required to be able to support those early warning systems. But then who is responsible for acting on those data that are generated by those information systems? And at what levels of the education sector then really action should be taken? And how can we ensure that this information is not underused or is not misused? So maybe Monsieur Le Breton and then Irvin, you want to react on this one? Philippe?
Oui, avec Avec plaisir, vous m'entendez
Yes,
bien?
with great pleasure. Can you hear me?
Oui, c'est une question vraiment importante qui
This
est
is a very
soulevée
important
ici.
question that we
Clairement,
raised here.
il s'agit de développer un système d'alerte
It's a question
précoce
to
qui
develop an early warning
permette de
system
repérer les signaux faibles
to
du décrochage,
capture
des
the
signaux
weak
qui
signals of
qu'on peut
children who
observer
are
dans
in
la vie
difficulty.
quotidienne des élèves dans
And these are
l'établissement.
signals that can be seen on a daily
Baisse
basis when
progressive des
these
résultats.
children are at
Un manque
school.
de participation en
Where
classe,
if
des
they
retards fréquents, une perte de
start
motivation,
no longer
etc.,
participating in
etc.
class,
Et
they're
ces
absent
signaux
more
faibles,
often. And these weak
ils
signals
doivent être
have to
pris en compte
be
par la
taken
communauté
into
éducative déjà
account
dans
by the
l'établissement.
educational
C'est ce que je
community
présente tout
within
à
the
l'heure à
school
travers le
itself.
groupe de
First of all, that's
prévention
what I was
du
showing with
décrochage scolaire.
our group
C'est-à-dire
to
que
prevent
ces,
kids from
ces
leaving
premiers
school.
signes
So
avant-coureurs du
those
décrochage
first
doivent être interprétés
signs have to be
rapidement et
interpreted very
doivent
quickly.
faire l'objet de
Measures need to be
réponses
taken
la plus rapide
to
possible.
respond
Et
as
donc, ce
quickly as
sont
possible to
d'abord
these
les acteurs
difficulties.
de
So
l'établissement
it's
qui
first of
doivent
all the
évidemment
staff within
intervenir
educational
efficacement,
centers that
mais
have
cela
to take
suppose
action.
déjà
And this
des conditions
presupposes
techniques d'interopérabilité entre les logiciels de vie scolaire et
interoperability
puis outils
between
de suivi du
school
décrochage. Ça
databases
suppose une
as
parfaite
well as
formation des
these
équipes
early
éducatives
warning systems.
pour
But
que
this means
ces
that the staffing,
informations soient
the teaching
interprétées
staff has to be perfectly
vraiment sans
trained in these new
stigmatisation, enfin
technologies
interprétées de
to ensure
façon
that there's no
respectueuse
stigmatization of the students, that
des
everything is
élèves,
done
de
with
leur
full
situation
respect for the students
et
and their situation.
permettent d'identifier des
It
solutions
makes it
pour répondre
possible to
aux
identify
difficultés
solutions
identifiées.
to
Et puis, il
overcome
faut
the
vraiment développer
difficulties
dans
identified.
chaque
And also,
établissement,
in
encore une fois,
each
vraiment au niveau local, une
establishment,
culture
at
du
the
repérage
truest
partagée
local level,
entre
there
les
has to be this
professeurs,
culture
les
of spotting
personnels
children in difficulty,
d'éducation,
teachers as
le chef
well
d'établissement,
as
évidemment, qui pilote
adjuncts,
au niveau local ces actions, et
those
puis
who
les
are
personnels de
responsible
la
for
sphère
actions at local level,
médico-sociale
and then as
en
well
associant les
as
familles. C'est
social
d'abord à ce
workers
niveau-là
and families.
que cela doit
This
être
is
traité, mais
where
bien sûr, à des échelons
first actions
plus
need to be
macro,
taken, and that at a more macro
ces
level,
indicateurs
these
doivent être
indicators have to
aussi pris en
be
compte en termes de pilotage
taken
pour
into
voir si
account
dans
for
tel ou tel établissement ou sur une
orientations to
zone plus
see
large,
which
eh bien,
establishment
il y
or
a des
maybe broader
difficultés
region
particulières,
has
environnementales,
specific
pédagogiques,
difficulties to the
et
learning
qui
environment,
nécessiteraient des
which
actions
perhaps
ciblées. Et
would
donc, il
require
faut
targeted
que
actions to be
ces
taken.
indicateurs remontent à
So
d'autres
these
échelons de
indicators have
pilotage
to be
pour assurer vraiment
pushed up the
des actions
chain to really
parfaitement
ensure that
efficaces.
action is taken effectively.
Merci beaucoup, Philippe. Peut-être Irving.
Thank
Donc,
you very much,
l'échelon
Philippe. And
scolaire
now Irving.
au cœur du processus, mais avec
So
d'autres
yeah, it says
rôles
the
de
heart of the
pilotage
process, but with a
aux
different
autres
role
échelons dans le
at
contexte
different
du
levels
Costa
in the
Rica.
context of Costa Rica.
Claro. Los sistemas de información, al menos el
Yes,
que
indeed. The
implementamos en Costa
information
Rica, como les
systems
comentaba, tienen la particularidad de que
that we
recolectan
have
información
implemented in
directamente
Costa
del centro
Rica
educativo.
have a
Claramente esto es
specificity.
una
They
ventaja
gather
en el
data
sentido de
from
que
schools
podemos trabajar en los
themselves.
diferentes niveles de atención, como mencioné
And
hace un
this is a
momento.
huge
Nos
advantage
permite
because,
visualizar un
as I said
escenario de
earlier,
carácter universal, pero
this
también nos permite
provides us
visualizar
with a
un escenario
holistic
territorial, un
view, a
escenario
universal
y por
view. And
supuesto
this
un escenario desde el punto de vista
also
implicado o
allows us to
individualizado,
break it down
¿verdad?
into each
En este
locality
sentido, el
to have a
trabajo
more
realmente
personal and
lo que
personalized
demanda es
view.
una fuerte articulación entre los diferentes
And what's
actores, entre los
important
diferentes
is
niveles
to
y principalmente
coordinate
entre
the
los
work of the
diferentes
various
sectores, ¿verdad?
stakeholders at the various
Creo
levels,
haberlo dicho antes, la
notably across
exclusión educativa es
sectors.
un fenómeno multifactorial,
As I
es un
believe I said
fenómeno
earlier,
multicausal. El poder
exclusion
mitigar sus efectos
has
demanda
several
evidentemente el poder
causes.
tener respuestas desde diferentes
And
perspectivas
to
y eso
reduce school
claramente es viable en la
exclusion, a
medida en
number of
que se logran
perspectives have to be
identificar
taken
las
into
causas
account.
que
And all
eventualmente
of this
ponen
is
en riesgo a
possible
la
thanks to the
población estudiantil.
identification
En
of
ese
the root
sentido,
causes,
contar con personas que
which are
eventualmente en cada
a
institución
danger and a
educativa
threat
hagan este
to
tipo de labores
pupils.
básicas,
So
pero al mismo
within
tiempo
each
es
educational center, we need to have people who are in charge of that basic work. But also at a macro level or higher level, we have to have the right tools, the right knowledge to really be able to spot those weak signals. And this work takes time. In Costa Rica, we've been working on it for about 10 years already, and it will probably be a number of years that we will continue working on it. But the most important thing is really to put things into perspective and into their context. A holistic work is extremely important. Data collection should be automated, but on the other side, capacity building is necessary for all stakeholders. This is what allows us to have a finer analysis, a more specific one to take targeted actions.
Thanks a lot. Thanks
So
a
that's
lot.
to react to what
So
Philippe
we've
said.
heard a lot
Yes,
about
thank you very
early
much.
warning systems, both
Yes.
in the case of the French system and in
On
the
the
case of Costa Rica, and through the Latin American perspective shared by Fernanda. But Sylvia, people would be interesting to know, well, in addition to those, if you could share, based on the current work that you are doing on how to promote learning equity in Latin America, if you could pick up one or two successful experiences, current strategies that are implemented by one or two countries from the region, that would be of interest for our audience.
Sí, con mucho gusto. Bueno, hay una experiencia exitosa que se conoce, pues yo creo que
Of
alrededor del
course,
mundo, que
there
es
is
la
a very
experiencia de
successful
Sobral, que
experience,
es una
which is
yes, for
experiencia
Sobral's
this
Brasil,
experience.
experience,
It's
en uno de los municipios más pobres del país,
a
que se
success story in
encontraba
Brazil, in one
hace
of
algunos
the
20 años muy
poorest
por
areas of
debajo de la
Brazil.
media de
20 years
aprendizaje. En
ago,
Brasil hay una prueba estandarizada que se aplica en todo el país y entonces, bueno,
there
pues se
was
sabe qué es lo que los
there's an
niños y las niñas están
standardized test
aprendiendo
that is
en
applied in
cuestión
the whole of Brazil, so we can
de
see
cuestiones
what students are
fundacionales, en
learning
lectoescritura y en
when it
matemáticas,
comes
¿no?
to
Entonces, aquí en Sobral
reading
decidieron
and
intervenir
maths. So
a
here
nivel
they
del
decided to
municipio para
intervene
que
at a
los niños aprendieran más y tuvieron como muchísimas
town hall
acciones
level,
también muy
and then
articuladas
they
entre
carried
sí
out several actions
que
that
tenían
were
que ver con lo
linked
que pasaba dentro de la escuela
between
y la
each other. They
relación de la
wanted to
escuela
see
también
what
con la
they learned
familia y
in
en un
school and also
tiempo
how they learned with their
relativamente corto
families.
para los
So in a
campos
small
educativos de
amount
10
of
años
time
lograron
for
colocar a
education
este
changes
municipio
in
de
a
los más pobres
10-year
del país
duration of 10
en
years,
los
they
primeros
managed to place
lugares de
those that were
aprendizaje de todo
in the
el
poorest
país de
area of the
Brasil.
country, and then
Entonces,
one of the
bueno, yo creo
best
que esa experiencia es muy importante porque demuestra
rates
que es
of
posible, ¿no?
educational progress
Algunos
in
de
the
estos
country.
mecanismos pueden ser
So this is
cuestionables. Yo
extremely
cuestiono
important
algunos
to
de ellos. Por
understand.
ejemplo,
There are some
uno de
mechanisms
ellos
that
tiene
we
que ver
can
con
maybe
darle estímulos
criticize.
a los maestros
So, for
cuando
example, there
logran mejorar los aprendizajes de los estudiantes, estímulos
teachers
económicos.
received
Eso puede ser
financial
cuestionable cuando menos desde mi
stimulus
punto
in
de
order
vista,
to
pero lo más importante es que
help
se
their
muestra
students.
que
This I could
es posible
really
trabajar con las
makes me
personas más pobres en un país para
take
lograr
another look at what
que
they were doing,
eleven
but at
sus niveles
least
de
it managed
aprendizaje y
to
de
be
esa manera
successful. They
lograr un nivel de
helped
aprendizaje. Esa es una
improve
experiencia que quería yo contar.
each
Y la
student's
otra es
learning
una
experience. So
experiencia
this
de
is
la
one
sociedad
experience I
civil,
wanted to
¿no?
share. Then there is a civil
Hace
society
70
example.
años se inició en América
70
Latina
years
un
ago,
movimiento muy importante que se llama
there
Fe y
a
Alegría,
very
que
important
es de educación
activity
escolar. También tienen
happened in
proyectos no formales,
Latin
pero
America. This is called
fundamentalmente de educación escolar
Faith
en
and
zonas
Joy, or
marginalizadas,
Fe y Alegría,
rurales, indígenas,
a
marginalizadas
movement
urbanas. En
that
este
is carried
momento
out
trabajan en
in
22
several
países y
settings,
tienen
urban
más de 1 millón
settings,
de estudiantes.
rural settings,
Y
and
estos
with vulnerable
estudiantes de
communities.
zonas marginadas están
They work in
pudiendo tener
72
resultados de
areas of the
aprendizaje que
region,
están por
and the
encima de las
students
medias
that
nacionales.
are work
La
in a Fe
política
y
aquí,
Alegría
que yo creo que
center
es una política
have
muy
always
interesante,
scored
es el
highly.
apoyo que los gobiernos le están dando
Then we also
a
need to
este
take a
movimiento,
look
al
at
movimiento
the
de Fe y
support
Alegría,
given by
¿no? Entonces
the
ahí hay
government
una muy
to this Fe y
interesante
Alegría
articulación
centers.
entre la
We can
política
see that there
pública,
is
que
an
es apoyar
articulation
a la
between
sociedad
public
civil que
policy.
trabaja en
They want
educación
to help
y
civil
la sociedad
society,
civil misma que tiene
and
esta
also
capacidad
civil
pues, de
society itself that
innovación y
has
de mejoramiento
the
continuo de la
ability
educación.
to continuously improve education.
Thanks a lot, Sylvia. And maybe one of the last questions that we will pick up from our audience has to do with the implications of different sectors to try to put together a policy that is really effective in this domain. Someone, for instance, is saying, well, we know that there are factors external to the schools that is conducive to school dropouts. Then very important to have collaborations with other departments, including social services, youth services, employment services, and so on. But in concrete terms, how this is organized, what type of coordination mechanisms work, what are the challenges, and what are the lessons from experience that you have. So I don't know, maybe again, Philippe, Irvine, and also Evelyn, yourself being part of civil society, how you look at those intersectoral platforms or mechanisms. Who wants to take
Thank you very much. I'll take that one.
Yeah, sure.
So for what we have experienced in Zimbabwe, it's the multi-sectorial approach because it comes from the National Development Strategy. So for all the government stakeholders to come together, including civil society, we use the Office of the President. Because if they call us, we are able to sit and then agree and disseminate on what needs to be done. And in terms of civil society working together closely with the government, is we operate within our expectations, especially on comprehensive information dissemination and a clear communication channel. This has helped for sustainability and accountability as we are looking on addressing the dropout issue, sitting with the different ministries. And at a quarterly basis, the government, the Office of the President, calls the stakeholders together to take stock on the commitments that have been made, especially at national and regional level. And this has been impactful. So the multi-sectorial approach really works in Zimbabwe. Thank you.
I don't know, Philippe, Yavin, or Fernanda, do you want to contribute on this one? Yes, Yavin? Yes. You're nodding?
Oui, je veux bien intervenir si vous le voulez.
Sure,
C'est une
I'm
question
happy
évidemment très
to answer.
importante
Of course, it's a
et
very
qui
key
constitue une
question.
dimension très importante de la
And
politique
this is
que nous menons
part
pour
and
lutter
parcel
contre
of
le
what we
décrochage.
do in order to
Comme je
fight
l'ai dit,
dropout.
nous visons vraiment
As I
à
said,
assurer des coordinations
we
d'acteurs
seek
qui
to
agissent pour
coordinate
une
between different
complémentarité,
stakeholders
pour
to make sure that everyone
l'efficacité. Hein. Et quand je dis, c'est
works
bien de
in
créer de
a
la synergie
complementary
et
way
pas
to promote
des
synergies.
concurrences qu'on peut
We
trouver
want
parfois
to make
entre
sure
acteurs
that different
qui
stakeholders do not act in competition to one another.
qui prennent en charge les jeunes. Et cette synergie, cette complémentarité, on la recherche d'abord dans
Acting
l'établissement scolaire
in
lui-même, à travers les
complementarity is
groupes
something
d'influence de
that
l'évolution scolaire,
matters
qui sont
both inside
constitués
schools
d'acteurs
with
aux
task
compétences
forces, which
complémentaires,
bring
variées,
together
diversifiées.
everyone who
C'est au
is
niveau local, mais aussi
can act
donc à
in
travers
order to
les
fight
plateformes de
dropout, but
suivi
it
et d'appui
also
aux
is
décrocheurs,
something
avec
that
les
matters at a
services de
local
l'État, avec
level,
des
where we bring together government
des acteurs
officials,
de de l'éducation nationale, de l'accompagnement des jeunes
education
vers
stakeholders,
l'emploi
people who are specialized in
et avec
supporting
des
youth
regards
in order to
complémentaires
get a
sur la
job.
situation d'un jeune spécifique qui a
But
des
we
besoins
also
spécifiques
try to
et
make
auxquels il
sure
faut
that we
répondre
always keep
de
in
façon
mind that kids
personnalisée. Et donc,
have
c'est vraiment ça
different
qui est
needs
recherché.
and
Et si on
act
monte
in different
ensuite
contexts.
différents autres échelons jusqu'au niveau national,
Going up
il faut évidemment
to the
une certaine
national level, we
coordination
also need to
à
make
l'échelle
sure that
régionale, par exemple, du service de
regionally
l'État
and
et du
nationally
service des
there's
régions qui, comme je le disais,
an
coordonnent
effort that is done
les
in order
actions
to
des
make sure
plateformes
that
de suivi et
all the
d'appui aux
different
décrocheurs et au niveau national, il faut que
authorities
nous
work
entendions
hand in hand. We need to make sure that
entre
everyone
ministères,
agrees. And
entre,
this is
avec
also
aussi
something that matters
les
between
partenaires
ministries, from one ministry to another.
des régions
We also need
représentées
to
dans
make
une
sure
association
that
pour
people and
qu'il y ait
organizations that
un
are
pilotage
represented within
absolument
NGOs
commun
are also
et
acting
qui soit pleinement efficace et qui, encore une fois, donc,
together and in the
favorise les
most effective
synergies
possible
et,
way.
et tout
Again,
ça
we
pour
need
une
to
pleine
promote
efficacité.
synergies for better efficiency. Thank you very much, Philippe. Now, Irving, did you have anything to say about
global et macro, la coordination des services de l'État pour un meilleur pilotage et
for better steering and making sure that everyone works in the same direction? Would you like to say something?
Claro, con gusto.
Yes.
Yo tal vez sumaría en complemento
I
dos
would like to
líneas de
add
análisis. Creo que por un lado,
2 levels of
el
analysis.
pensar
I
el
believe that,
trabajo
on the one
intersectorial
hand,
debe verse desde
to
el punto de
think
vista
of
estructural.
a multisectoral strategy, we need to take into account different points of view. For example, we need to promote school attendance. I think Sylvia mentioned that during her presentation. This is one of the best investments the state can make. Then we also need to understand something else. In Costa Rica, we need to go beyond only trying to add different actions that everyone is doing from their own domain, and we need to create an integrative strategy. This is the challenge for the years to come, at least in my country. Second, we need to talk at an operational level. We need to strengthen a network type of strategy and look at it with a multi-level approach. Investing in education needs to go through different levels. It needs to go from the individual up to the central level or the state level. There are different levels in the chain. This goes through the communities, each regional subsystem, depending on the context. To be able to articulate or communicate between these levels is key, because then we can really create good policies and develop good ideas. But if these are not helped by an operational system, they will only stay as good ideas. These are two key issues I wanted to mention. Maybe another thing I wanted to mention to make this more efficient is that these needs to be within these have a formal approach. Sometimes we do not have proper protocols in place, and there's certain criteria and different strategies to see which actor is going to intervene. We need to make policies more institutional.
With this idea of integral planning, planification integral, the hearing, we are going to conclude with few words of conclusions by Dan Wagner, who is our counterpart with LEI, Learning Equity Initiative, for this series of debate. So over to you, Dan, if you want to put together a few concluding remarks.
Just a couple of words. First, let me thank again IAEP. This was really an excellent webinar, and thank all the panelists. Such interesting and diverse perspectives, fantastic. And the Learning Equity Initiative is really pleased to partner with IAEP and others on this, putting this webinar together. Given that we are somewhat over time, I just want to make two quick comments. It's not possible. I'd love to comment on each of the papers, but that would take too long. I just had a couple of points. One is that since we organized this around to some extent, the relationship between learning and dropout, I'd say that Sylvia's presentation, which led off, is something I think to maybe keep even more in mind. We got into many of the presentations were on the systemic and structural pieces of exclusion from education. And I think maybe if we take this up again, we need to see what part learning plays in this exclusion. It didn't get quite as much attention as I would have liked in our conversation today. And also, maybe I really appreciated the use in Spanish and in French of the word exclusion, which is different than the word dropout. And we sometimes in international meetings like this one need to pay attention to the kind of names that are given to things. If you are an English speaker and are aware of the word dropout, you have the sense that it's the student who we blame for dropping out. Whereas if you use the French and Spanish words, you have a more structural sense that it's exclusion, that it isn't the student only dropping out, it's the student being pushed out by structural and systemic reasons. And I think the panelists all did very well in describing those issues. And I think that the chat was very laudatory, as it should have been, on this terrific discussion on exclusion. So thank you for the chance to chime in a little bit with a few words. well done, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dawn. So we are going to close with those words and also telling you so that there are different pieces from IP that are going to be out within the next few months. One that is related to learning equity, as you've understood, and another one that is on the articulations between ministries of education and civil society organizations, including to promote equity within education systems. So please keep posted. And the last word to tell you that we will have our third strategic debate on the 23rd of September. And the topic of this one will be on reducing the teacher gap and planning for equitable teaching. And so I encourage you to attend also this one and to register to this new IP event. Meanwhile, I wish you a good summer break for those who are going on a break, and we will be happy to reconvene and see you on the 23rd of September. Thanks a lot. Thanks to all our speakers, and see you soon. Bye bye.